Welcome to the Context Podcast by Proofgeist, where we get to talk about whatever is going on in the FileMaker community. I'm your host, Martha Zink, and on this episode, I'm joined by Angelo, Luchi, and Todd Geist. We are going to focus on hosting. It's something that Angelo's been doing for a long time, and we'll talk about hosting with FileMaker Server. Now, you might be on-premise, you might be in the cloud, maybe you're hosting it yourself, or you're going through a hosting provider. It doesn't really matter. What does matter is that you keep a few things in mind to make sure that you protect your data and protect your business. All right, I've got Todd Geist and I've got Angelo Luchi here. And Angelo, I've known you for quite a long time. You've been part of the FileMaker community for a very long time. And obviously your specialty is hosting. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Just what's your background? What do you love to do? All those great things.
Yeah, so I got involved in the hosting world around 2003, which is when I co-located just a small handful of servers in Boston and started putting together, low-cost entry FileMaker hosting, web hosting, email hosting for just a few handfuls of clients, little projects that I took up on the side. From there, it just became a active hobby through the years as I worked for several different FileMaker houses. And finally, in 2009, when the industry started to get a little rocky, I was forced to jump out of my dev position and jump full into the world of hosting. So I put all my eggs in and went hog wild. And through that entire experience, I jumped from co-located machines to public clouds. I was using AWS at that time, 2006, when they first started. And it was scary then, let me tell you. You could accidentally power off a machine and it would be gone forever. All your data gone. So backup plans were mandatory at that point in time too. But just a whirlwind of cloud providers and my own equipment out there in the world for almost 2 decades now.
That's awesome. And then today, where are you today? Let's talk about the today, because it's pretty exciting what we're doing at Proofgeist. So what's your setup these days?
So right now we are a true multi-cloud host. We're in 25 data centers worldwide. We've got a full DevOps setup, so active monitoring, multiple backup paths and recovery options, and a really good team behind our platform to service, monitor, maintain, and take care of our customers. All of this is now backed up with Auto on the platform, which is really great. So now we've added to our DevOps tool set, and we give back to the community with our Auto included instances.
And the name of that hosting platform is
Automatic.
Automatic. That's right.
That's right.
That's what we try.
FileMaker on Automatic. That's its tagline, sort of one of its taglines.
Totally. Yeah, that's great. All right, cool. Well, I think for this podcast, we really just want to talk about hosting, about protecting your data, really dive into your experience. And Todd, obviously, you've been a big player in creating some software for, obviously you've created Auto. So I think getting your input on some of these things would be good too. But let's just hear about some of your experiences. I know you've got some thoughts about ransomware. You've had experiences with internal threats. Just spoiler alert that I like to keep these podcasts light and sweet. I have a feeling that you're going to test me today, but we'll try to keep the smile for part of it. But I realize it won't be all unicorns and rainbows today.
No matter what happens, though, you have to keep a positive attitude, or else it's just going to fall apart. So
that's right.
Even though we're talking about ransomware, we are still happy and excited about new avenues of threats and things that we need to mitigate. So
that's perfect.
That's the exciting part.
Awesome. I love it. All right. So where do you want to start? Do you want to start talking about maybe some internal threats or what that's like, some experiences you've had in that category, maybe?
Yeah. So, with internal threats, we've got a couple of things. We've got an accidental internal threat. We've got intentional internal threats, and both are catastrophic when it comes down to it. Accidental threat would be a situation where a client accidentally deletes, all your records, or gets into schema and trying to add a field to a layout and blows apart your TOs or your fields or whatever it might be. Situations like that can be pretty easily mitigated with, snapshotting, which is something that we do, other providers do. We're able to roll back that data 20, 40, 60 minutes past or further to get that customer back up and running pretty quickly. And, you yourself can do this stuff as well. All the tools are built into many of the operating systems. So setting up a snapshotting system is straightforward. We have our intentional threats. We've got a sort of a controversial nonprofit that we've seen and done work for. And they've had issues with employees getting hired and trying to sabotage their data sets or remove their data. So we had to implement some early on mitigation for that, setting them up with no direct FileMaker access except through a portal where we're hosting FileMaker. We call it Apps on Demand, but they can log in. They have access to the stream. It's two-factor authenticated as well. And then everything is logged. So all of their access is traced through our system. We can also modify their menus in FileMaker to notify us when users are deleting data, so they can see if somebody is purging data from their database or even accessing data from that database. But it's all dumped into Slack, so they get real-time notifications. It's the quickest thing we could do for web integration with that. But, that backup's invaluable. And then limiting access through multiple methods and being able to log that and call that up if there was something in question, again, invaluable in that situation. Have either of you seen anything like that in your tenure?
Well, I've definitely had issues where employees who might be leaving try to get hold of the database, for customer records and things like that. So yeah, and this gets really tricky because, especially now in the modern sort of view of how you build applications, a database might have credentials to other applications. So you might have your QuickBooks login information, or your QuickBooks, authentication system might be part of your FileMaker database. So somebody getting hold of that and being able to get into that, can present a lot of problems. Certainly, having database encrypted at rest is a big help here too.
Big help,
which the Claire's platform allows. Doing things with dev servers and production servers where you can actually have where developers can have no access to production data. Mm-hmm. Another way you can help lock down that kind of risk.
That's right. With Auto, what do? You export a clone and do a data import on the prod side. So there is no touching of data, period.
Right. So the developers literally don't have access to defined database in production. That access can be limited only to, execs or people who are specifically allowed to be able to get into the production data. Otherwise, everything's done on dev, and dev doesn't have sensitive data or sensitive credentials or things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've had a client in the past where it was similar. A client, a user was leaving, and they were very worried that they were going to take some of the data either to a competitor or that they would just download it and try to get their own customers out of this information. So for that one, it was more of a user management issue, and that they didn't expect it coming, and so we had to go backwards and do some stuff with backups. We also had some logs built so that they could track who was logging in and who was logging out, in a more user friendly way than a server log. But yeah, there's definitely lots of. My optimistic side did not expect that, and then I had a lot of lessons to learn. But there it was. But it was a good lesson, and to be reminded of user management's pretty important. And I've never been an accidental threat. I'm sure neither of you have ever been an accidental threat. Data deletion, all the things, right? I mean, I know as a developer, I've had my in my younger days, I remember definitely destroying some data and being highly dependent on backups. So I know the feeling.
Runaway script that just topples everything for you. Those are the fun ones.
I once wrote a runaway script. Sorry, I knew the script was running away. I didn't have access to the server. admin console. And so I wrote a backup Runaway Script that was deleting the records that were getting created. It was a total mess. I mean, eventually we fixed it, but it was definitely a weird mitigation in there.
So these are examples. Some of these are examples of why you need a good backup routine, of course, which I think we'll get to in a little bit. But that's you've got encryption at rest, you've got good backups, you've got good user management control. Those kinds of things are pretty important for just being able to make sure that your data stays your data and is correct. It's not lost.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, why don't we talk about backups? I think that's such an important thing to discuss, but it's something that everyone talks about, but maybe not everyone really understands what levels of backups we're talking about or how consistently they should do it. I know that when you first install, Claris, when you install FileMaker Server, it has certain defaults, but are those good enough? Should we be doing more? What's your take on the backup schedules and things like that?
Always need to do more. You can never have enough backups, no matter what you're involved in. There is a golden rule in backups. It's 3-2-1. You've got 3 different backup types, 2 different medias, and 1 offsite. And that is a great golden rule to follow when you are dealing with mission critical data. I mean, and data that runs a business, mission critical. Can you survive without that data? Well, only time would tell if you didn't have a backup. Because it's not a question of how, it's a question of when, because something will fail eventually and you will need that backup. Now,
I was going to say, can you talk about the difference, say, between a OS level snapshot and a backup versus the backups that FileMaker Server provides?
Yeah, so FileMaker Server, depending on your retention with those backups, will do a couple of different things. So having a 0 retention, it's going to basically do a full backup every single time. Now, you add some numbers to that and say you want to retain 7. It's going to look between those, and files that didn't change will not get backed up, but instead be hard linked to the previous. So it will save you space in the long run, and not use up valuable resources in backing up those files if they haven't changed. And backups with FileMaker can be very server intensive, especially if you've got massive amounts of container data. But if it can hard link items that don't change frequently, it will speed things up, and you're good to go. Now, OS level backups again can be similar. Where you can do backup snapshots within the OS, like Microsoft has VSS snapshots. That has to work in conjunction with other tools if you want to do backups of your live data. So in a situation where we are with our Windows servers, we would initiate a pause and a resume in between a VSS snapshot. That way, FileMaker can write all the data in memory to those files. We can back it up effectively, and it's not in a crash state, and then resume it. Whole process usually takes under 2 seconds to complete. And it's, again, a very effective tool, but snapshots are not backups. That is something to keep in mind and to distinguish going forward. It's always good to have a full copy that wasn't put together with deltas. So always have the full backup in addition to snapshots if you're doing snapshotting. Now, there are tools and other software applications out there that can assist you with backups, and many of them will back up the FileMaker hosted data in a quote unquote crash state. So you do have to be smart about what you're doing. So either back up the backups, or you write some scripts in between things to pause and resume when they hit that data set.
So maybe just to flesh that out a bit. So in order to do an OS level snapshot, or an OS level backup, you either want to be doing files that are closed, backed up, or you have to integrate with FileMaker Server and write some kind of system commands, probably using FMS admin command line tool or the admin API to pause those databases before you do the backups. And if they're not paused, you're saying they're in a crash state. And that's that state where you open the file and it says the file was not closed properly, right?
Correct.
That's what that state. You may have, if you're a FileMaker developer, I'm sure you've seen a file where you've dragged a file that was open on your desktop, you copied it somewhere else, and then you open it and it says, oh, the file is not closed properly. Mm-hmm. And that's what you're talking about, right? That's what that is crash correct. State means.
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct.
And so you have to do a little extra work to make that happen. You have to make sure that you're writing either REST commands to the admin API or system commands using FMS admin to make sure you pause and resume in between that OS snapshot taking off or kicking off.
That's correct.
What about offsite backups? I know we talk about S3 backups all the time, but are there services you recommend? What does that mean? What's that for the layman's terms? I remember when it used to be an offsite backup was literally taking a drive, taking it to the bank and putting it in a lockbox. So is that what we're still doing?
Yeah. In today's world of ransomware attacks, tape backup is still your best bet, no matter which way you look at it. It's seen a resurgence in its popularity because of that. But immutable offsite backups through an S3 provider, whether it be AWS or Wasabi or Backblaze, there are many out there that provide S3 compatible services. They can give you a very high level of reliable backup connectivity. And a lot of cloud providers are increasing their speed to these S3 providers. So data moving back and forth will be much faster than it used to be. We, for instance, will back up nightly, compress it, put it on S3, and it is immutable for 90 to 100 days, meaning no one can delete it, no one internally, no one externally. That data is there for that time period, and then it will cycle itself out. That protects us against, a ransomware attack, for instance, or someone who might
not
get access
deletable
to
or editable.
That is correct.
Changed.
That is correct. It can only be downloaded. That's it.
Yeah.
And if you've got encryption at rest, you're double protected right there.
Right.
And the reason why that's important is these ransomware attacks will search your drives for copies of the data, and they will just encrypt whatever they find. So by having something backed up offsite to something like S3, where it's set up as immutable, they can't touch it. Once the file is uploaded to S3, it cannot be ransomware locked like it can be if it's sitting on your server. If it's sitting on your server and you get hit by ransomware, your backups are going to get hit by ransomware too. They're not going to be protected unless they're offsite. Is that right?
That's correct. That's correct. Yeah. I've seen several instances in my tenure doing this where ransomware threat actors, and they're usually live when they do this. I was actually able to see one in action through a series of monitoring, which alerted me to a ransomware attack that was happening on a old server years ago. I was able to see the steps that they went to, the websites that they went to pull these tools down. It's all out there on GitHub too, which is the worst part of it. So they were able to get through, most firewall rules that block certain sites and just pull down these tools to sniff and inspect networks and then start the encryption process. But again, if you've got good monitoring and good backups, you can be alerted almost immediately to this stuff happening.
I know that at Pause, Wim Decourt and Heidi Porter and Chris Moyer, they talked a lot about ransomware. I think they did a double session for this because it's such a big deal. But it's easy to ignore, right? It's easy to think it won't happen to me. It's not that big of a deal. My data is not that precious. This is all probably not exactly true. So talk about the impact that ransomware can really have in our world and that you've seen happen before.
So the last threat I saw was about 4 years ago. And this is the one I was just speaking of that I found handling this. They left a note on the instance that they were connected to saying they wanted $50,000 US in Bitcoin transferred. And I did some research after the fact just to follow up and understand a little bit more on what they were looking for. And I reached out to some quote unquote ransomware experts and people who could, decrypt, your files. And the truth of the matter is they really can't unless someone's released those decryption keys or software to do that. They actually charge you double of what the ransomware is going to be. They pay them X amount and they keep the rest, is what the plan is with the quote unquote ransomware decrypting people out there. You can negotiate with these folks. Was another thing I found out. A lot will do it for less money. But again, if you can't pay that demand and you don't have backups to restore, I mean, what do? Do you start from scratch? You go back as far as you can and sort of rebuild? Do you have a paper trail that helps do this in an all digital world? I mean, how many businesses out there keep paper records of all the stuff in their database? I don't know very many.
You have to pay it is basically what happens. I mean, if at all possible, you reach some agreement. I should mention before I forget that Wim and Chris and Heidi were on the Context podcast.
That's right, with
just
Jeremy.
3 episodes back, so not too far. So we'll make sure we have a link to that in the show notes.
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, I think Jeremy followed up with me after that podcast and asked a few questions about what we did to mitigate ransomware attacks. And he had bounced what I had said back to Wim and Heidi and whatnot. And, everyone was pretty much in agreement with policies and plans put in place to remediate that.
That's great. And so we're saying these things can happen quickly. They can happen unexpectedly. So what are you doing to catch these things? You mentioned monitoring a bit ago and being able to catch and see what steps were happening, but what kind of monitoring do you recommend?
Yeah, so there are many tools out there to monitor. If you're hosted with AWS, you've got AWS CloudWatch. You can deploy your own Zabbix server. There's a company called New Relic that's got some decent monitoring. All of these are great tools, but they're not going to be complete out of the box. You're going to need to do some configuration, some testing, and you're going to need to understand where your thresholds are, because you don't want crazy numbers of alerts to come through, because then it'll just turn to noise, especially if they don't mean much to you. So if you are proficient in those tools, or can, essentially Google foo your way through and find what you need to find to do that, you can get a pretty reliable monitoring platform in place. We've spent hundreds and hundreds of hours perfecting a Zabbix farm that helps us self-heal. It alerts us in real time when disk I/O and CPU usage are high. So we know when something's wrong. We can tell when even a script is a runaway script at this point. And help a developer or a customer fix or mitigate that situation as well.
Yeah, like when the encryption kicks off, it's going to spike CPU, right?
Big time.
So it's pretty obvious when something like that's going on that somebody's trying to encrypt everything on that computer.
And the monitoring tools are only as good as the team that's monitoring it. So if you've got no one on call or standby to receive these alerts, you might as well not have any monitoring at all. But, if you've got a good team and you got the tools behind it, then it's an effective platform and a first defense line.
All right. So, Angelo, do you get to actually sleep at some point, or are you just always monitoring the monitors?
No, I get to sleep occasionally.
All right, good.
At least once a week.
Do VPNs or other or firewalls play a role in protecting you against ransomware attackers?
They can, most certainly. The more portals and avenues that you can cut off to threat actors, the better you are. So, let's talk about firewalls. You've got software firewalls built into OSs, Linux and Windows, Mac. They all have a software level of firewall. They're okay, but they're not perfect. And same for hardware firewalls. They're not great, or I should say they're not perfect, but they will do an excellent job, especially if you keep up with patches and updates. In the past, I've seen VPN firewalls go unpatched and be the cause of a ransomware attack. Fortinet had a huge issue with that a couple of years ago, where an unpatched vulnerability led to almost 500,000 VPN user accounts to be broadcast on dark web, and people were just helping themselves and going into networks, ransomwaring networks like crazy. So it's a thing that you've got to keep on top of, especially if you're dealing with your infrastructure yourself. But to limit access through a central point, whether it be VPN, Bastion host, or even a service like Zero Tier, which gives you sort of what do you call it?
Zero Trust Network, or
Zero Trust Network. Yeah, thank you. Right? Out of band networking.
Yeah,
it's essentially VPN-less VPN. But tools like that can help restrict access from the public web and get your people into the things that need to be gotten into.
What about FTP?
What
about FTP? That's got to be a problem too, right? Because we're opening, there's times where we want to push stuff to a server, or we're going to process something, we're getting something from another data source. That's pretty common these days. So what does that mean for security?
FTP's, fine for certain things. I think it's an outdated technology. Still has some use today. Can be easily replaced with SFTP or SSH transfers. You could also replace it with access credentials and S3 access to get data back and forth. And those may be better avenues. Anything outside your network or outside of the server that you need to get onto, but still has high-speed access, probably a benefit to your security and your sanity at that point.
So for automatic, we do allow SFTP access, right? We have servers, we especially for the Linux platform where there's no remote desktop. It's kind of essential that we're able to provide that.
That is correct. And to take it a step further, you disable usernames and passwords altogether, and you do it based off of public and private keys.
Right. So the amount of access that that you give is pretty restricted. Like, it essentially allows access only to given folders and only for things like downloading or uploading, and not write access, not like execute access.
No commands can be executed through that access.
That's the key.
Mm-hmm. And with that, we had to work out some issues with FileMaker permissions, because there's always that fun little bit.
Yeah, FMS admin, FMS server.
You get to know them very well.
Yep. So what I'm hearing a lot of, though, is that the key to this is you have to keep it up to date. Like, whether it's your backup strategy, whether it's your VPN, whether it's your firewall, whether it's your OS, you have to keep it up to date. It can't just sit there forever without being patched, because as these things drift back in time, more and more hackers figure out ways to get access to older versions of the operating system, older versions of the VPN, etc. So that becomes a pretty important part of the job when you're running a server, is maintenance, keeping that up to date. Is that true?
That is true. Most certainly. Yeah. Patches must be routinely kept up with, whether it be the OS patches, even FileMaker. FileMaker's got good reasons for a lot of their updates. They're patching OpenSSL in a lot of cases, which, could be an issue. Look at the Log4j thing that just happened. I mean, look at how many software platforms just had to patch all of their software just to remediate that.
Is there a difference with operating systems? Like, are any of the three that you can run server on now inherently more secure or less secure, or is it really just a matter of knowing how to lock down each of those different OSs?
It's definitely a matter of knowing how to lock down each of the different OSs. All have their strong suits, all have their weak points, and you're going to find vulnerabilities across the board. And it's just like I said before, it's a matter of closing those tunnels down, so people have less of a chance of getting in or discovering that.
Yeah. Do we have a preferred OS? I was just curious. For automatic, do we tend to prefer one OS over another, just internally?
Internally, we're deploying mostly Linux and Windows platforms. Depending on demand for M1, we might dabble a little into that realm. But right now, those are our two major ones.
Yeah, the M1 is interesting. It's changing the economics. We'll see whether that becomes a real a real hosting platform. But Linux and Windows are certainly Windows has been the sort of go-to for really ever in terms of hosting. And now Linux is just becoming a thing, and it looks like it's going to be very compelling. And certainly what I tend to default towards is just give me a Linux box.
It's
easy to maintain, smallest, cheapest, all that stuff.
Don't have to worry about the Microsoft licensing.
Right. No Microsoft licensing, which is real. It costs money. Linux does not. So there's that too.
Yeah.
Now, all of this is reminding me about documentation. So backups, firewalls, anti-malware, antivirus scanning, that's all well and good. But if something does happen catastrophically, you've got to have it well documented so you can bring that system back online and functioning as quickly as possible. So knowing what you've done to that server, critical. And there's tools out there to help you. ClickUp is a great tool. ClickUp can help you create a good documentation flow and whatnot for your setup. Open source software like Bookstack, a great one too for documenting all things you can either purchase or, Bookstack's case, you can host that one yourself if you wanted to.
When you're talking about documentation, you're talking about documenting how you've run into these problems, how you're going to solve these problems, what's next steps to take. Is that what you're talking about there?
More so the configuration of the server.
Okay.
But steps on, how to fix something again would be ideal as well in that documentation. We go through that all the time. We'll take Windows 2016 server, for instance. There is an issue with older versions of Safari, say on the 1015 platform and HTTP 2. You'll get that nice little NX100 error on your Safari window. Document the fact that you have to change or add 2 reg keys to that server in order to fix that problem. That way, if you have to deploy it again, you know the process, or a tech coming in or entry level tech coming in can find that and do that as well.
Yeah, and especially if you're a small business and you don't have people who are 100% dedicated to monitoring the server, this becomes even more important, because what if that person leaves or is not available in the middle of an attack, or just plain old corruption, right? File goes bad. What do you do? If you don't have dedicated personnel for that, documentation is going to save your butt. It's all well and good that you have backups, but how do you get to those offsite backups? Where are
There's
they?
everything.
Where are they? Are they in S3? Are they in Wasabi? What are the credentials? All that stuff needs to be somewhere. And you should have a plan for that.
Yeah. I've, not too far in the past, heard from a company whose purchasing agent had left, and they didn't know the extent of what that credit card had been applied to. So their hosting account with one of the larger providers out there sat and became unpaid for almost 60 days. And they lost all of their infrastructure in one go. Luckily, they were able to open up some support tickets and get the majority of it back and restore. But, it's scary stuff that people really need to pay attention to.
Yeah, like if you're using a cloud provider and you go into arrears, guess what? They shut you down. And all of a sudden your FileMaker server stops working. And if you don't know, it's not unheard of for some of our, smaller customers to not actually be aware of who's doing their hosting. Not everybody at the company is actually aware of who's doing the hosting, and it's not really clear. Who do you call when that happens, kind of thing.
And if that point of contact left, then that's it.
It's crazy how simple hosting looks from the outside, right? Like I can think of things I've hosted in the past, or asking you to host stuff for my clients. It's like, here's what I need. You ask me a few questions. I have a server. There are files that are hosted. My clients are happy. Like it all seems so simple and straightforward. But behind the scenes, there's so much going on, right? I mean, you're monitoring, you're making sure that the setup is correct, you're documenting things, you're keeping track of how things are looking or offering suggestions if we need more space or if something's going on, right? So
Most certainly.
It's a little intense to hear what your role really looks like because you make it really easy for me. So thank you for that. I don't think I've said thank you yet.
No worries.
Yeah, I mean, there's other things, right? We talked about, obviously there's attacks, but there's just corruption, right? Databases it has happened. There's also data centers themselves have issues. Networks have issues. The internet has issues.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. There have been some pretty big data center failures that have put people out for a period of hours or days. Have we had to deal with any of those recently, Angelo?
Ourselves, not particularly, but the ones that do come to mind, there was a cloud provider called OVH Cloud. They're fairly large private cloud provider, but they had a data center fire in Strasbourg that took out 1.5 data centers. Their availability zones, quote unquote. They had one primary and then 3 secondaries, in very close proximity. So fire happened in building 2, damaged a good chunk of building 1, and took out 62% of their public cloud, including backups. And they were still mitigating up until, a few days ago when they finally released the last of it. And I think they ended up recovering a fairly decent chunk, but a year out in that situation, can your business survive for a year without backups and running?
And it even happens to the biggest.
Right. AWS, back in 2019, I think it was August, their Reston, Virginia, their largest data center had a power failure, and their backup generators kicked on, ran for, an hour and maybe hour and a half, and then they all failed.
They ran out of fuel or something, probably.
No. The hardware failures.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was just kaput. So they ended up losing a whole row of EC2 and EBS block store on a particular floor. And I think it amounted to only 1% of their business. But when your business in a single data center is, millions of customers, that's, 1% is a very big number of people who lost their block store and their instance. And what happens if your backups, I know with AWS, you can do snapshots with your block store, but what happens when all of that's gone? What was your failsafe? Did you have that extra backup media or offsite backup outside of that cloud provider, or even replicated it to S3 and pushed it to, multiple availability zones? Did you do that, or did your consultant do that? Something to bring up and ask.
Yeah, I mean, I think, in general, especially for some of our smaller customers, just getting their server into the cloud is probably better than them running it themselves in a closet somewhere, without even a UPS backup or any power backup or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
So getting to the cloud helps, but it's not an answer to all of your problems, because you still have things like data centers failing. You still have ransomware attacks. You still have issues with employees maybe trying to log into things they shouldn't log into. So it's only a step in the right direction to get maybe out of your own IT infrastructure into a cloud. But unless you do all these other things, you're still subject to potential loss, and losing critical data could still happen. Yeah,
most certainly.
Yeah, we definitely forget. I mean, it's again, just like it's easy to realize all the stuff that the hosting team is doing. It's easy to forget that the cloud just means someone else's data center. And so
someone else's
thinking of
computer.
physical objects, someone else's computer, exactly right. So we're still dealing with those physical things that can happen, along with all the other virtual things that can happen, right? That can happen online.
Yeah, I mean, the cloud gives you probably better internet connection, more redundant internet connection. Probably gives you a less likely that your particular server is going to fail. They probably handle that aspect of that. You don't have to worry about they're going to do a better job with, say, power failure than you will, right?
Right. Yeah.
So they'll handle that sort of thing, but it doesn't mean you're protected from any of these other issues.
Yeah.
You still have to deal with that.
Now, a lot of the cloud providers out there, and we do this as well, our engineering teams will keep an eye on the servers and monitor the physical nodes for failure signs. And, I know AWS recently just enabled this across the board. And like I said, we do this as well. But, once an error is detected or an issue is detected, the VMs are migrated from one host node to another to help, not cause a problem or drop your VM or data going forward.
Yeah.
And some of the other smaller providers, are still playing catch up with that, and that's got to be something to consider too.
Right. So I think one thing I'm curious about, and I think we'll touch on Otto here a little bit, when it comes to being a developer. I have for a long time rested on a hosting team to do the bulk of the work and carry stuff on. But as a developer, I can cause harm accidentally too, right? I can write bad code. I can be doing dev on a live server. What are ways to mitigate that kind of stuff? And what do we do to help to prevent that from happening too often?
The best solution, again, you mentioned before, is using a piece of software like Otto. Otto's got the FM migrator tool wrapped into it, gives you a nice, clean interface to manage your development copy and pushing that dev copy to prod. So, doing your development in an isolated server and pushing it to production is going to help alleviate some of that issue. And then, like I said before, a solid backup plan where you've either got snapshots running or snapshots and backups running to get back if something critical fails and you have to keep going.
Yeah, I mean, Otto has the dev prod thing down, but it also has S3 backups.
That's right.
You can set up offsite S3 backups with it. So if you're running in your own data center, or you're running your own, you've got AWS or something else set up and you're running Otto on it, then you do get the ability to set up an offsite backup to a different S3 provider, for example. So that's a nice advantage too. Like I think, so Otto is going to be and we're going to continue to evolve it into being sort of the thing that gives you this kind of base level of protection on your own server, right? Whereas Automatic is our full platform that handles everything. And so it's going to handle things that Otto won't be able to do, like monitoring, things like that. So Otto's kind of like, the step for the first couple steps you can take, and then Automatic is basically everything we can think of to make your data safe, and in sort of all of those ways.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome.
A lot of years of experience that went together to put all of this together.
Absolutely. Angelo, if you were to summarize, we've talked about a lot of different things, but like if you had to summarize and say, hey, look, if you had to take away just a couple of things from this podcast and about how to, potentially manage your own hosted server or having a hosting company, what are some of the things that you would really want people to focus on and be aware of?
Focus on backups, most definitely, and then monitoring second. Those are going to be your two critical things. And then always be aware of access, who you've granted access to, what is open to the public world, and what can be locked down. Those things will save your bacon, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, totally. Awesome.
Yeah. Backups. Encryption at rest, backups are two things you can do that will really save your bacon, as Angelo says.
Yeah. It takes one time to really feel the pain, right? You forget one time, you don't realize something turned off, whatever it might be. You loaded a new server and didn't save your settings. Yeah. I think we probably all are a little bit sensitive to it, because I know that I've felt the pain at least once. And there's a lot of regret and sadness and a lot of time lost. I mean, really, productivity gets lost. It really has a huge impact on a business. So I hear you on that. All right. That's a good one. That's a good takeaway. All right. Well, this has been fantastic. I can't say it enough, but Angelo, I am thankful to have you on the team and to get your support.
Great.
You have supported me both at Proofgeist. You've supported me in the past when my clients had needed your hosting for your previous endeavors. But it's awesome to have you lead a team that can really take care of hosting clients and us as well on the development side. So thank you for that. This has been great. Todd, thank you too. I know it's always great to hear what you've got to say about this stuff. I appreciate
Thanks, everybody.
it.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks again.
Thank you.
All right. Hey, it's Martha Zink again. Thanks for joining us, and we hope you enjoyed it. It was really nice to be able to chat with John and Todd. Just a reminder that this is available on both YouTube and as a podcast. If you can take a minute to pause and subscribe, we'd really appreciate it. But better yet, if you can share it with a friend, that would be pretty awesome. No matter if you're a FileMaker developer, a consultant, a user, a designer, a project manager, or whatever other role you might have in this community, you're proof of how amazing this community really is. My job is to help spread your knowledge and your stories on this podcast. Find me on Twitter at MZ123 or at Proofgeist, and let's share your story.